What if you are unwittingly participating in secret occult rituals, being influenced by symbols and signs and hexes and wards that you don't understand? If you don't know the language of the elites, then you are playing their game. I'm going to give an argument today about why you should understand astrology, that maybe what's happening up there does impact what happens down here. And books like The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, The Masons, and the Building of Washington, D.C. is not an attack on Masonry, but rather a learn the language textbook. It's quite a bit big. We're going to start learning the language today of the stars. Let's get into it on the book. Now, I talked about the Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, which is a huge book, and they will make a great argument that the streets of Washington, D.C. is laid out with astrological symbols on the very streets of the city. We'll show some of that a little bit later, maybe in this video, maybe in another. But there are astrological symbols all over our nation's capital, and we're going to show some of what the founding fathers of the United States did and believed, to the point that they felt it was important to do certain rituals and ceremonies at very specific times and make alignments to their buildings in very specific ways to point up to the stars and vice versa, down below. Remember the pyramids. Many people think that the pyramids in Egypt, for example, are aligned with the stars of Giza. The Giza pyramids are aligned with Orion's belt. And there's a mirror of those, the Milky Way onto the planet Earth. Did the people who did the founding fathers of America do the same thing with with our nation and the nation's capital? I would argue, according again to this great book, yes. And the evidence is amazing, and it's well researched, and we can cover as much as we can in this series. But I want you to, for example, take a look at just open your eyes to what's around you and consider that they know something you don't know. Why is NASA, for example, with all of these different programs, the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo mission, why are they named after Greek and Roman mythology? Why do we do things at certain auspicious times? Why do we make launches, for example, at certain times? Why do we launch on the 33rd parallel and things like this, and the Masons and the 33 degree? All those things have been taught my whole life, and it made me curious enough to buy that book that I showed you on the screen. So just start to think for a moment that there may be a reason why the very streets of Washington, D.C. are laid out the way they are, that there may be a reason why they did certain things at very specific times, because they believed that the stars above actually impact what happens down here on Earth. If you watch my series on the Book of Enoch, I'm covering a little bit about what the ancients believed about the stars, that they were conscious entities, and that those entities controlled or impacted the lives of mortals on Earth. And so if you don't understand that they know those things, then you're missing major, major clues. Take, for example, our major corporations, and this is just a small sampling. There's a million of them. Saturn, with their logo of the Pleiades star system in the constellation of Taurus. That is not a mistake. The company Subaru in Japanese actually means the star constellation, the Pleiades. If you don't know the story of the Pleiades and the sisters and the heaven and what that all means, I'll guarantee you the corporation does. The people who founded it and some of their leaders probably are well aware of what it means and what the importance is to Earth. Saturn and the rings of Saturn depicted the god, the planet, the rings are in their logo. There's a reason. It's not just because it's, hey, this would be cool. There's an argument to be made that the elite know things about the planet Saturn. They know things about the Pleiades. They know things that you don't know because you aren't super educated. And I say that not to be offensive to you, but that's how the elite feel. The elite spend time going to school, they go to college, they get degrees, and they learn about ancient Greek and Roman mythology and ancient Near Eastern religion, and they know shit that the average person who didn't go that high in their education, they don't know. And so one can argue that people who are highly educated communicate with each other through symbols that are like, hey, I know what you mean by that. If you don't know their language, they're communicating amongst themselves and you're missing it entirely, which is what they count on. It's another reason why for the longest time the church kept the Bible in Latin so that the average person didn't have a clue, or why things were in certain languages so that the average person couldn't have it. So, and it's in the scientific field to this day, we have all these words that don't mean anything unless you're highly educated. Nike, the swoosh, is after a, was it Greek? I think it was a Greek goddess. I think it was a Greek goddess. Nike, who was, the goddess of victories and be it in battle or in competition. So that's why Nike with the athletic symbol does that. And we've got down here, of course, we've got I think it's is it Maserati and their Neptune symbol, the trident of Neptune. We got Versace. You can't see it below my thing, but Versace and the Medusa head. These companies, these corporations in our country know what these symbols mean. They know what it means to them. And you, the average consumer, doesn't. And so therefore, one can argue, if you're an occultist, and some people argue that the highest level elites are all into occultism, they're communicating symbols right in your face. By the way, as an aside, as a really cool primer, check out the show Cabin in the Woods, where they talk about how the masses have to see it right in front of their eyes and not know what's happening. I'll have a series later, or I have a video at least later, on the Olympics and the massive occult ceremonies. And I use the word cult loosely, by the way. I want to make sure this is not religious. So I want you to understand, when I say occult, I'm not talking religion. I'm talking about things that are hidden in plain sight, things that are hidden from the population. So when they do weird ceremonies of the occult and you're like, I don't understand why there's all these eyeballs everywhere and why they got this giant floating casket and all these weird creatures are bowing down to it. Like, I don't understand it. You're not meant to. In fact, it's meant to be right in front of your face so that you're participating. This is an argument I'm making, an argument. So keep in mind, I'm not saying this is fact, because I'll get sued if I say it's fact. This is an argument to be made that these rituals all around us, from our symbols that are on our the products we buy, to the streets of our governments that are laid out in certain ways to show what gods they venerate and which gods they're looking to for power, all of those things, and the ceremonies that they go through, the ceremonies and the holidays that we participate in as a nation, and we think, oh, it's so cool, we love this holiday. What if those religious holidays harken back to times that worshipped a pagan god that you know nothing about? And what if the people who are at the very, very top know exactly what that's at, and kind of like, look at those dumb sheep. Everybody's participating in our massive ritual, and they just think it's about Christmas or Easter or whatever, and they have no idea what they're really doing. And that, according to many occultists, is what gives it power, that the masses are too dumb to realize that the sheep are playing the game without realizing they're playing the game. So this is kind of a primer to a series that I want to do on astrology. And we will get to the traditional modern astrology, horoscopes and what the planets mean, and if there's alignments in the sky that mean something down below. But the point being is that I want to go back to the beginning to show you where some of these ideas started to come from, where the ancients got the ideas that the planets themselves were conscious entities controlling life on Earth. Take, for example, the Neanderthal man. I used to think this question when I was going to school. I was born and raised Christian. I studied Christianity since the day I was born, and I was just told to believe that the Bible is true. At some point in my education, and again, the higher up in education you go, the more the people who are highly educated start to learn the basis of these systems. But I began to ask the question, well, when did the first people ever get the idea and a concept of God? Think about this for a moment. If you had no concept whatsoever of God or what it is, then where would you come up with the idea of God? Would you just imagine the idea that there's some magical man in the sky that controls the earth? Where did they get that idea in the first place? Now, there are three common, scenarios that have come to my mind on where man got the idea that God exists in the first place. Now, you could argue, if you're a hardcore religionist, you'll say God himself told man he existed, and that's how they know. But again, if you want to get into a fight about whether or not evolution is real or whether man was just created 6,000 years ago, that's a whole nother nutshell. But at some point, if you go back to the idea of the caveman, if you believe that existed, did the caveman have a religion? Did they have a religious system? Did anybody come down and tell them about God? Where did they get the idea to look to the heavens and think of something? Now, one argument to be made on how man came up with the idea of God in the first place was the idea of a watch implies there's a watchmaker. A hut implies that there's a hut maker. If you have something like a watch, then you must by deduction, realize that somebody had to have made the watch. And so did ancient man simply look around and say, this could not have happened by accident? There's order to everything. The sun and the moon rise at different times, and it always happens every single day. It's like we're on this big celestial clock, like a giant watch. And therefore, if the universe is a giant watch and the stars rotate and the sun rotates and the moon rotates and it's all like gears and cogs in a wheel, then there must be a watchmaker, therefore there must be a god. Is that where it first came from? Now, I would argue the more interesting, I'm not saying it's the more accurate, but the more interesting one is that the ancient people actually recorded in a lot of stories that we now call myth and legends that beings from up there somewhere came down and interacted with human beings. And we described them various ways. Many cultures, and this is one of the oddities, and this is not a race thing, and this is not a religion thing, but it's a history thing. Many cultures, even that have dark-skinned people, believe that they saw beings of light or white skin, beings of light, or white skin. I said it twice. And that's odd, right? If you're going to have a culture that's going to invent the idea of a god that came from the skies, why wouldn't your god, by nature, look like you and your people? So if you're a dark-skinned people, why would you have white-skinned people coming from the heavens? Because a lot of the ancients believed that there was visitors that came to ancient man who were either white, dressed in white, or beings of light, and that they came and went from the stars. And so therefore, many depictions of the ancient gods depicted them with wings, possibly because that's the only way that man could conceive of the idea of how do we get from here to there? They must have wings to fly. Because if you're a simple person and there's no vehicles, there's no planes, whatever at this point, all you know that can get up into the air is birds that have wings. And so you start to depict these creatures from the skies as having wings so that you can relate to people. Look, these beings can fly up there. And they have spacecrafts and they have chariots. That's another way. The ancients would look to the skies and say, these beings have craft. Well, we kind of have this chariot on wheels. They must have a chariot in the sky. So did they just simply use their common language of the day to relate a concept? We're being visited by beings in the sky, so therefore we're going to depict them as wings, and they seem to travel around somehow, and the only way we know how to travel is by chariot or whatever, so they must have a chariot up there kind of thing. Is that where the symbology came from? You have to at least understand that that's how they may have thought. So when you get to later studies about where the mythology is developed and what the symbols mean, you can kind of understand, oh, I can see why you would have thought that back in the day. Now, I know this picture right here is a little scary, but in occultism, like this is, I think, a pretty relatively common picture of Baphomet, although sometimes Baphomet is androgynous and has breasts like a female and male genitalia. This is a stylistic version, but notice the hand up and down. Hand up and down. See, I have to look to see how my orientation is on the camera. As above, so below. So modern esoteric schools, occultists, if you want to call them an occult, just again, not meaning evil, but meaning hidden information, say that what happens up there as above happens down here below. So notice that this figure, which is a very classic figure, is pointing to the heavens and pointing to the earth. As above, so below. And this is a concept that appears through ancient history, that something that's happening up in the skies above us impact what happens on the planet below. The stars' alignments are conscious entities, many believed, and they influence the mortal lives of men. Think of Zeus, think of Olympus, think of the Council of the Gods in Greek and Roman mythology, and maybe further back than that, if you want to argue, I'm not going to go there. The point being is that a council of gods is a common concept, that there's a group of beings that get together and they govern the lives of man. And sometimes they toy with man. They just interact with us. And again, now, if the leaders of your countries, the leaders of your corporations, if they understand them and they understand the stories, first of all, that there's a council of gods and those gods intermingle with and affect and impact and play with mortals on earth, you can say maybe they really believe it. How would you say they really believe it? If they took the time to go out of their way and have great expense to make a building at a specific time, or to orient a building in a specific way, or to build a city like Washington, D.C. on a swamp, which is not super great place to build it. But if it was more important where it got built, regardless of whether or not it's going to cost a fortune, whether it's a good place, where it's built is the most important thing. And when it's built is one of the second most important things. If you don't understand the language, then you just think, well, that's just a really weird choice. No, it's not such a weird choice for the educated. So again, this series is going to start talking about that education process. Where did it come from? What were they thinking? And do they really believe it to this day? Or was it just something cool? Like, they just look at it and go, hey, look, this is kind of cool. Let's borrow some Greek and Roman mythology. They were great empires of the past, so let's just copy them. Could it have been that? Or was it more? Is there a religious system playing out right underneath your eyes? Now, once again, I refer you to this book right here, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, The Masons and the Building of Washington, D.C., by David Ovason. You are going to be taught to laugh at a lot of what I'm telling you. You're going to, oh, this guy's got way too much time on his hands. He's a couple of cookies short of a fucking cookie jar, whatever the hell you're going to be taught to laugh at me. Check out this book. Again, it's very, very thick. And by the way, I just want you to see, before we get into this last little part, it's got all kinds of diagrams in here. It is extremely well researched. It's got pictures of DC and all the astrological items that are all throughout the city. It is a city of the stars, is what Ovason says. And what you need to do is stop laughing a little bit and start paying attention to, what did the founding fathers actually think about Washington, D.C.? I want to show on the screen here a few quick highlights and then end with the whole Washington, D.C., the city of the stars, of the gods. And if they're doing this, if they put on your dollar bill, for example, the pyramid with the all-seeing eye at the top, and Christians are like, I don't understand why we need to have the eye of Horus on our dollar bill. Yeah, you might want to know why things are written in Latin, like the New World Order. All of those things, I understand a lot of you are laughing at me right now, like, this guy's a nutbag. We're just getting started. Bear with me. I'm a receipts kind of guy. I'm going to try to do my best to show you it's not something to be laughed at. It's something you should consider learning. Learn the language. Learn the language of the stars. Learn the language of your founding fathers, if you're in the United States and other countries, by the way. France, for example, is another city of the stars. And France donated the Statue of Liberty to the United States when we got founded as a country, because it was a statue of Isis or Columbia or Libertaria, whatever you want to say, the same goddess, the goddesses, both big, huge things about cities of the stars. Like, these governments speak to each other through their symbols and through their mutual understanding of the heavens above. As above, so below. This is the theme of the whole series. All right, I'm going to show you this couple of slides. Here is a depiction of the Masons, if you will. You can see all these guys in this depiction all have the robes. This is not a picture. This is a depiction of events that come right out of the book that I showed you, and the historical records that document it. The first boundary stone being placed, a Masonic ceremony at Jones Point in April 15th, 1791. And at this time, depicted in this picture, and this is a picture painting representation, Jupiter is in Virgo, meaning the astrological zodiac sign of Virgo was on the eastern horizon. If you looked out towards the east, that zodiac symbol at the time that the nation was founded was Virgo, was in the eastern sky, and Jupiter, the planet, was in Virgo, and that meant something to the Masons who follow the stars and know the stars. So it's not just a significance. And then I'm going to point out a series of things of why everything was lined up with the constellation Virgo. So here's one, again, the boundary stone in April 15th, 1791. The book goes into even more specific details about why, I keep hitting things, why specific dates were chosen. We're not going to, it's too much for today's lesson. Here's another quick depiction of Ellicott. If you do read up the history of Washington, D.C., like in this giant book, and if you're really fascinated, the city of the stars, Ellicott and Benneker using celestial equipment to survey the stars to find out where certain planets are in alignment in the establishing of the federal districts. This is kind of depicted here. And here we have another depiction of George Washington as a Mason, which, yes, he was a Mason. And again, none of this, I want to make sure you're clear about this. None of this is to bash Masonry. The Masons were big into understanding the stars. They're like our modern astrologers in a secret society, but not so secret, more like a society with secrets, not a secret society. If it was a secret society, you wouldn't know who they were, right? You wouldn't know they exist because they're secret. You know who they are. You've heard of the group. So they're not a secret society. They're a society with secrets. But anyways, George Washington depicted here laying Pennsylvania Avenue along with the setting sun. So you're going to see at the very end of this how the streets of DC were lined out in very specific alignments, and they meant something. And I'm going to hint at, and I know people will argue and laugh, but hopefully you'll see it enough that you go, huh, maybe that DA guy's onto something if you haven't heard it before. So here again is the view from Capitol. If you were at the Capitol, this is a depiction of what it would look like at the Capitol from where the White House is going to be placed along Pennsylvania Avenue with Virgo out in the distance, Regulus, Spica, Arcticus. There's different alignments going on. And again, the book explains all this in detail. We're just getting started, so don't expect to understand all of it yet. I don't understand all of it yet. It's a deep book. I've read enough of the book, not all of the book, but enough of the book that it's like a lot. Here then is a depiction of the White House cornerstone being laid on October 13th, 1792 at the cornerstone ceremony when the moon and the dragon's head is ascending in Virgo. Again, so Virgo on the constellation and the moon is in Virgo. So many ceremonies that were done laying the cornerstones were done at very odd times of day, and a very odd on very odd days of the year when the weather wasn't optimal. The reason being is because Ovason would argue, and I would also argue through his book, that the timing of the stars were more important than whether it was a good weather day or not. They did things to line up with very auspicious times with significant meanings. And sure, you can say those guys back then had too much time on their hands, or the very foundation of the city was laid for spiritual significance and continues to this day, which is what I would argue and will argue through the course of the series. Another depiction of the Capitol cornerstone being laid September 18. Is this the one? September 18, 1973? Yeah, George Washington and his Masonic regalia, again, doing a special ceremony at a very specific time on a very specific day. With Virgo, by the way, with Virgo, right? Always, because Virgo is going to be during this time of year right there. Here is a depiction that's best capturing as best as possible from Ovason's book, the alignment of this earthly and celestial triangles created by Spica, Regulus, Arcticus in the sky above the Capitol, with Virgo right to the east of the Capitol. All of these alignments this way. Look at the Washington Monument there. These triangles is a depiction about how this is representing what's up in the skies, that they laid out these things very specifically. And if you don't see it right now, we'll try to get into more detail if you're still interested in this series as we move forward. Or if you're just laughing at me, maybe I'll do it anyways. I don't know. This here's a depiction of the Washington Monument cornerstone being laid July 4th of 1848, a Masonic ceremony in a large public gathering with the moon in Virgo and several other celestial signs such as Ceres, Astrea, the Virgin Mary of Columbia. All these depictions are kind of like, to them, to those who study the stars, this would have meaning to them. Why Virgo, by the way? Why Virgo so much? Because it was considered kind of like the goddess of Washington's D.C., a goddess that would be looking over the goings on and projecting abundance and fertility and growth for your nation, because that's what they thought Virgo would. And our city, Washington, D.C., would be tied to Virgo. And you're going to see this showing up in all kinds of crazy shit throughout the series if you keep paying attention to what they were thinking when they laid the cornerstones, dedicating the city perhaps to Virgo, and what that means. On screen here, you'll see some archetypes that are associated with Virgo, the same being the Virgo, the Virgin Mary, Isis, Ceres, Astrea, all of these liberty, which is the Statue of Liberty, which could also be the statue of Isis, could also be the statue of Ceres, could also be the statue of Virgo, could also be Virgin Mary. All of these are synonymous goddesses. Isis from the Egyptians. All of these were basically renamed throughout the ages by those in the know. But if you don't know, you don't know. They know what you don't know. And this is a depiction. And again, it's why the French, also being a city of the stars, dedicated the statue of Liberty, who is also Isis, who is also Ceres, who is also Virgo, who is also Virgin Mary. It's all the depiction of the same goddess, but with different names. That's where it gets complex. And what Ovason will argue in there is Washington, D.C. is a massive city of the stars. There are more depictions of zodiac, astrological signs, depictions of presidents as Greek and Roman gods. It is obsessed. The city is obsessed with astrology, zodiacs, and certain other cities are as well. And they communicate with each other. I would say that the governments communicate with each other through the way that they lay out their city streets, which we'll end on right now. How is Washington, D.C. laid out? By people who are French and who had connections to Isis and Virgo and all that shit. Where was Washington, D.C. built? On the hills of Rome? Stuff we'll talk about later. But let's look at those streets of Washington, D.C. as a closing thought, hopefully piquing your curiosity, as I say. I always say it that way because of South Park. You have got my curiosity. Anyways. All right, what we've got here is a failure to communicate. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Sorry if I got away from my microphone, but we've got here is a failure to communicate. Anyways, this is a controversial image because of the goat head and whatever. But what I want you to realize, we're going to zoom in on this very, very close, and I want you to pay attention. This is Washington, D.C. This is a reference photo. As we zoom in here, I want to show you a few things. This is Washington, D.C., like from Google Maps, okay, with some overlays. What I want you to pay attention to is the White House right down here. This is the White House at the bottom of the pentagram. And there's circular. There's Logan Circle. Which circle is this? Connecticut Avenue. What is the name of that circle? Anyways, those who live in D.C. are going to be killing me for this. The Foggy Bottom Circle right here. See these rotundas? Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that in Washington, D.C., the points of the pentagram that line up like this have these circles? It's very easy to see from a street view. If you take the lines off, you can't miss it once it's been laid out for you. Even right here, there's a rotunda of some right at vertices of the symbols of this giant pentagram. Like somebody wanted you to be able to see these. And the streets, let's zoom in a little closer on the streets of DC. This is a street. Look at that. That is a street with cars that goes at this weird ass angle all the way down to the White House. And another street with, it's a street with these weird ass angles going. Who in the fuck laid out this city street? Well, it was important to people making a city to the stars to line it out this way, and Pennsylvania Avenue to point to Virgo and the horizon and to line it out this way. But the most shocking, and again, this representation of the goat's head, I'm not going to make this about the devil. I'm not trying to say this is the devil, but the idea is that somebody has traditionally outlined, and there's a better depiction I wish I could show you. See these ears right here? These ears could go, there's a depiction of the same goat head that has the ears down here where these two points of the star come out, and the horns go up into these two horns and the mouth, so that the whole pentagram, somebody has overlaid the goat's head so that the horns are on top, the ears come out to the sides. This goat head is a little higher up. But what's really interesting for a food for thought is that, again, that someone designed these wacky ass city streets with major things at the vertices. Look at that, right out here. A building, very prominent and easy to see from the sky at the points at where they want to make sure this is visible. And that was what I would argue. They want to be sure it's visible from the sky. Why? Because I would believe that the ancient founding fathers believed that the gods were conscious, and the gods looked down from the heavens and would see our city and see the symbols that we were laying out on the streets of the city to say, I see you know, as above, so below. This would be away from the craft, the chariots of the gods, the watchers above us, who are looking down on the city of our nation and going, I see you down there. I see the symbols you're putting on your streets. But the last food for thought I'll have, and again, I want to be careful. This is not anti-Masonry in any stretch of the imagination. What I want to point out right here, this right here is the White House. South of it in a line is not too far off. It's not centered, but there's the Washington Monument right there, right? There's the big Washington Monument, a giant obelisk. Holy shit. Don't even get me started on obelisks and the gods and obelisks. We will get into that. A gigantic phallic symbol. See, I'm just going to tease it. I can't help it. We're going to get into that. And it's not something to laugh at. Know the language. If you just laugh, that's exactly, in my argument, it's exactly what they want you to do. They want the masses to laugh at this like it's some big joke. Oh, well, you got too much. No, you know who has too much time on their hand? The people who laid out those fucking city streets in this weird ass doesn't make sense at all way, and then laughed at you for pointing out that, gee, that looks like a pentagram. Oh my God, you're a moron. No, why did you lay out your streets that way? But here's what's interesting from a Masonic standpoint, because again, this whole book, which I've shown you a few times, right? This whole book is talking about how the Masons were kind of a secretive society with secrets. They worshiped the stars, not worshiped the stars. They venerated the stars. They did things to show reverence to the beings, the conscious beings above us, that they were in the know and they knew. But here's the interesting part. It gets really esoteric here for this food for thought. This is the White House. In a direct line of the White House on 16th Street, which goes straight into the White House. If you follow 16th Street, it goes straight into the White House. If you follow that 16th Street all the way up through this intersection of the horns, if you will, all the way up to R Street and S Street, right here along the 16th Street line is the Temple of Freemasons. The Freemasons literally have their temple directly north of the White House. And those in the know would say, George Washington, being a Mason and being the Grand Master of his lodge, the reason why the Masonic temple is directly north is the seat of power is always in the north. The seat of power being the temple of Masonry. The Masons were the secret. This is the theory. The Masons are the secret power behind the White House. They're to the north. They are in the seat of the power to the north of the White House. They control what happens in the White House, and that is why their temple in Washington D.C. exists north of the White House, above the symbol of power, representing that they are the secretive, hidden power behind the White House. So, laugh at it if you want. It's okay. I've been laughed at my whole life for pointing these things out. I used to look at this more from a religious standpoint because I was born and raised religious, and my church had a real problem with Masons and said they're anti-Christians, they're devil worshipers. And I can see why they thought that, because, right, you get the whole devil worshiping horns and the goat, and it's a symbol of the devil and blah, blah, blah. I can get why they mistook, I'm going to say they mistook it, why they mistook this as pure, simple devil worship. It's much, much deeper. You either know or you don't know. I invite you to come along with us as we discover the hidden language on the streets, in your emblems of the items that you buy, in the holidays that you celebrate, in the rituals that you perform without realizing that what you're doing is a ritual. How those in the know might be secretly laughing at you as you, the dumb, educated masses, make fun of this whole thing like it's a big joke. And it's no joke. They do believe, as above, so below.